Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a literal game changer of a Supreme Court decision, one that completely redefined what it actually means to be safe in a modern democracy. We're zeroing in on the 2008 landmark case of the Secretary of National Defense versus Manalo. Now let me tell you, this isn't just some dry, boring legal text. It's a profound exploration of human dignity, the right to true security, and exactly how far a government must go to protect its citizens.
So let's just jump right into the central mystery here, because it challenges our most basic assumptions about freedom. Imagine this: you've been abducted, held completely against your will. Then, miraculously, you manage to escape. You aren't in a cell anymore. You're physically out walking the streets. Are you actually secure? Does the law still need to step in and protect you, or is the case closed simply because you're physically free? Keep that question in the back of your mind as we go through this.
Section 1. The Manalo Brothers Ordeal.
Okay, we absolutely have to start with the facts. And frankly, the true story of Raymond and Reynaldo Manalo is harrowing. They were two brothers from San Ildefonso, Bulacan in the Philippines, and understanding their nightmare is crucial to understanding why the Supreme Court ruled the way it did. This timeline really puts their ordeal into perspective. On February 14, 2006, armed men wearing military fatigue pants and army boots barged into their home and abducted them. And for the next 18 months, they were secretly bounced between different military camps. They were subjected to brutal interrogations about alleged rebel connections and faced severe physical torture. In one truly horrifying instance, Raymond was caught trying to escape, beaten, and literally poured with gasoline. But finally, on August 13, 2007, they found a window. Their guards were asleep after a drinking session, and the brothers managed to make a daring escape.
But here's the tragic part. As they surfaced to actually point the finger at their captors, they realized something terrifying. Their physical escape didn't mean they were free from the threat of being hunted down. The people who held them had explicitly threatened to kill them, even openly debating their execution right in front of them. So, sure, they were out of the military camps, but they had to immediately go into hiding, living every single day in absolute fear.
Which brings us to Section 2, escaped but not free.
Now, this exact situation created a massive, unprecedented headache for the legal system. The brothers went to the courts for protection, right? But the government essentially argued, hey, they aren't in our custody anymore, so let's just drop the case and close the book. But the brothers pushed back hard. They argued that their so-called physical liberty was completely meaningless if they were forced to severely restrict their own movements just to, stay alive.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. The Supreme Court actually completely agreed with the brothers. They established that because a very real threat of execution remained, the newly created Writ of Amparo was absolutely applicable to their situation. The court basically said, look, just because they escaped rather than being voluntarily released doesn't mean the threat just magically evaporated. In fact, because they were now actively exposing specific military personnel, the target on their backs was arguably bigger than ever.
Section 3. Habeas corpus versus Amparo.
To really get the genius of this ruling, we have to look at the legal tools that were on the table. You might be wondering, why didn't they just use the traditional stuff we hear about in movies, like habeas corpus? Well, habeas corpus literally translates to "where is the body?" It's a great tool if someone is currently locked in a cell by the state, right? You demand the state produce the person and justify why they're holding them. But remember, the Manalo brothers were already out. They didn't need to be released, they needed to be protected. And that's where the Writ of Amparo steps in, asking a much broader question. Is there an ongoing threat to life, liberty, or security?
So you can see why Amparo, which actually means protection in Spanish, was the absolute perfect shield for the brothers here. It's a remedy specifically designed to combat extralegal killings and enforced disappearances. It covers not just actual physical violence, but the looming threat of it. It basically gave the court the power to step in with both preventive and curative relief to stop the ongoing harassment in its tracks.
Moving to Section 4, the 3 dimensions of security.
Now, this is the absolute crux of the whole decision. Led by Chief Justice Puno, the Supreme Court took the right to security and expanded it way, way beyond just not being in a jail cell. They broke it down into something deeply philosophical, yet highly practical. The court essentially said, security isn't just a negative right, like the absence of harm. It's a positive guarantee. It's the active presence of safety. Let's look at exactly how they defined these 3 new pillars.
The first dimension proves that you do not have to sit around and wait for violence to actually strike. A credible, looming threat is more than enough to violate your rights. The court recognized that a life lived in constant, paralyzing fear just isn't a secure life.
The threat of violence restricts your freedom just as effectively as literal iron bars do.
Then we have the second dimension, which recognizes bodily and psychological integrity. Because let's face it, torture and severe intimidation destroy something much deeper than just flesh. They destroy human agency. The court rightly noted that being forced into hiding, being terrorized, and having your mind fractured by torture is a profound theft of your psychological well-being. It is a fundamental violation of your security.
And the third dimension? This is huge. It places a positive obligation squarely on the state. The government can't just promise to leave you alone. They actively have to protect you. As the chief guarantor of order, they are legally required to conduct effective investigations, preserve evidence, protect the victims, and actually bring the perpetrators to justice. If the state fails to take these vital steps, they are actively violating your constitutional right to security.
And applying this to the actual facts of the case is where things get pretty shocking. The court found that the military miserably, completely failed this duty. They conducted this superficial, one-day investigation. The military's provost marshal just relied on the sworn statements of the implicated guards, didn't bother to cross-examine them, and didn't even try to reach out to the victims' families. The court looked at this and said, no way. That ineffective, one-sided investigation was a direct violation of the brothers' right to protection by their own government.
Which perfectly sets up our final section, human dignity and duty.
This colossal failure by the state brings us to the profound philosophical core of Chief Justice Puno's decision, one that really anchors the law to our basic humanity. The foundational principle here is that the state exists for the human person, not the other way around. Our entire constitutional framework values the dignity of every individual above all else. This isn't just some abstract academic idea, it is literally the primary reason governments are formed in the first place.
Take a look at this concept, because it's incredibly powerful. Human dignity fundamentally requires the exercise of free will. When captors use fear and terror to dictate someone's movements, they are literally stealing their free will, and by extension, their human dignity. When you strip a person of their ability to make choices, to just walk outside without terror, you are attacking their fundamental humanity. And this matters immensely, because the Writ of Amparo exists specifically to restore that free will and force the state to be accountable.
And that right there is exactly why the court upheld the Amparo production orders, forcing the military to cough up their internal documents. The state's duty to protect its citizens absolutely trumps its own desire for secrecy. The government actually tried to argue that demanding their internal investigation files was somehow an unreasonable search and seizure. But the court shut that down instantly. They ruled that constitutional protections against unreasonable searches are there to protect the citizens from the government, not to act as a shield for a government trying to hide from citizens demanding accountability.
Ultimately, the Manalo case teaches us that true freedom is way more than just an unlocked door. It is a structural guarantee of safety backed by a state that is actually willing to protect the human dignity of every single citizen. So I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. If your own democratic institutions fail to properly investigate the threats against you, can you ever truly be secure? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.